Alright, welcome to another video here on implement this PDF reader with U3 and Nuxt, but using a dynamic link. So meaning that the user can set a URL where now they can load and see a particular PDF, right? So yesterday I created this Vue3 components loading dynamic PDF URL, which was this, okay? And now what we're gonna do is to provide the functionality. Meaning is, so when the user enter a particular URL, hit the proper function to load that. Now define this loading screen as well as the loading or this progress bar. So ultimately the client can see the PDF, right, as well as the number of page. Okay, cool. So back to the code. Let me show you the code. Interesting. Why cannot? There you got it. Okay. So let me now run the dev server, the Nitro server engine. Okay. And since in this case, what I need is to pass this so pass this URL to the PDF render. So PDF render is actually containing is this function. All right. So PDF is the one who's going to render that, and it will fetch is the number of page. So this is what it's doing. So this is what makes this this request. Okay. So this is our render. So what can we do here is, so once we get the dynamic URL, okay, then we're going to perform the HTTP request. So in this case, the XML HTTP request, okay, to see what's going on in there. All right, to see what's going on in there, so we can get that data. For this. So once we perform this XML HTTP request, here, I just want us to now show the loading screen. Okay. So is there any component that we can use for the show a progress bar? A progress bar. A progress bar with Tailwind. Okay, now let's go back here to the browser, and that's right, it's loading that. All right, that's cool. So now what it's doing is to populate that width and transition all duration of 200, and this is what you're gonna do here. So what they're doing is just to get that query selector of loading by that class, current progress, set an interval of that. Current progress is less than 100. Increment that. Okay. Increment the current progress. And if the current progress is greater than 100, make the current progress equal to 100 and call this set progress. So set progress, what it does is to update the progress. So loading.style.width is here. So this is the way how you can do that with this is how you can do that with Tailwinds. Okay. So if I take a look at the view stick, in this case the progress var from view stick, like this, intermediate, coloring, sizing, slots, buffer, maximum value, and things like that. Okay. All right. So what we can do here is we have two alternatives here. We can use this particular component from viewStick. Okay. We can use these particular components or implement our own loading. Okay. Tailwind progress bar with tail grids. Or steps from here. Let me look at the templates here. In particular, it's more like the components here. On the applications, let me see if they have something like a progress here. Forms, toggle actions, navigation, steps, overlay, elements, layout, components, page examples, and on page examples here, nope. Product features, shopping cart, product quick, categories, product list, media objects, notifications, navbar, paginations, alert, components. It seems that what I want is some loading component here. Well, there is no loading component. Okay, no problem. no problem. Node loading component. So progress bar, Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS progress bar. But I think this is a okay, or with labels. Interesting. Okay. This is the full width, background 200 neutral, background, and then you got another. Exactly. So the whole point of this is that you have is two diff here, one of the background with neutral color or some gray color, and on top of that you have is another div that will be autocomplete until it reach to the total width. So if I now go back to the code, and the thing that I'm gonna do is to, once I click on the load, we're going to navigate to a particular loading, or we're just going to show a loading screen here. So if I go back here to the code like this, so I'm gonna show is a loading screen for this. I'm gonna show a loading screen where in here this will have is basically the same layout like this. Okay, yeah, basically the same layout like this. Yeah, basically it will have the same layout where here it will be a flex element which get me the entire height of screen. Okay, and the items will be center, since this actually is a flex, and I want to make this, and I want to set the background color to slate 50. All right, and right below that is define another div here where this will have is the total screen, the total width screen. This will be behave as a flex, where here I'm going to set is two elements in flex.wrap. Okay, and let's going to add some padding on the left 8, okay, as well as padding when the viewport is bigger than the medium media query, meaning is something around. So if I take a look at the Tailwinds, one of the great things of using Tailwinds is that we can access to the Tailwind settings. You know, this is one of the great things of this. We can access to the Tailwind presets. And here, well, know about what is the yeah, the width. So all the properties that are in this project. So for example, if I look at the screens like this, so small screen representing is 640 pixels, mid is start from 768 pixels, and that kind of thing, right? And all of that. So okay, back to the code. Oh, come on. So back to the code here. All right. So this will get triggered from once the width is wider than 768 pixels. 768 pixels. Here I just want to add a padding left of 32. Okay. And if I go back to the and if I go back to the Tailwind preset, P32 actually stands for 8 root element, okay, or 128 pixels. Awesome. Go back to the code. So inside of this, I just wanted to load is a H1 element, a heading one, that will be contain, so that will set is a text twice the element, 2xl, and 2xl. If I go back to the font size, okay, to the Tailwind configuration, 2xl is in this 1.5 root element, or 24 pixels is this. All right. The text 2xl, that's right, as well as the font bold, tracking height. It makes the text color grade 900, and when it comes to from small or from small devices, meaning it's starting from 6040 pixels, okay. So once the viewport once the viewport is bigger than 640 pixels, you're gonna set the text font or the text size or the font size as 3xl, or in other words, the font size will be 30 pixels. 30 pixels. 30 pixels. Okay, and here you're gonna set is the loading. All right. And right below, we're going to add is these two class here, on these two tag here. Here I'm telling is, hey, this class will get the entire full. Then this class will get the full width. Okay. The background that I'm gonna use is the neutral 200, and if the dark is style, we're gonna use is the background 600. Meaning that if you want to set this, for example, with another theme or with that dark theme, this will be And I'm adding is another on top of this div. I'm adding is another width that actually we're going to show is the loading. Here I'm defining is this element with a primary, which is blue by default. If you want to take a look at the styles from the Tailwinds here, for example, at the color, that's right, the color. So on text, if you define things like primary, interesting. There is nothing like primary. Okay. But by default, the primary color is something blue, but it doesn't define that. So what we can do is, well, set that primary color. Using is in indigo here. We can say is background indigo with that. Adding is a small padding. Center that element. The text here is small. So if I go back to the code, the text font is small, as well as the font medium, leading none, meaning is the line height, so with no line height, and text primary is 100. Again, this is adding is a text color for this, but we're gonna add is a text color of text slate of 100. So now if I save this and go back to the browser, okay, and now call this and then run the app, okay, of course it's not going to show that, only right below here. And this is exactly the behavior that we want. All right, so now let me take a look at here at the loading. Perhaps we want us to add some more padding here, okay, or margin in this case. Let me add is a margin top 10, okay, and that's right, it look better, but the problem with this is that it is loading, okay, it is loading so this element actually so we will need to add is, so for example, some padding to the right side. Meaning, so we'll need to adding is on the G-axis, on the X-axis, some padding here. Now it's much better, right? Now it looks much better. Okay, awesome. So now that I made this, which is the PdfReader with U3, and then you're gonna load this screen, awesome, here. So what we can do is to abstract this logic into its own component. Okay, so here we're gonna define is another view component called loading.view. Okay, using is the boilerplate from vbase view 3 with TypeScript, paste this code, right, and then call that component here. That will be called is loading, right? So this is supposed to load this component, right? The loading component. And then you got it, right? We got the loading component. So Vue actually do what it's supposed to do, which is great. And now with this loading, we'll need to pass is the proper value here, specifically when it comes to update the width of this. So we can define is a property called width, okay, or to be more precise, loading you can say progress, okay, where here you're gonna pass is a number here. So we can define here something called progress, which here you're going to pass is a number. All right. And on the loading, we're going to define is that properly. So by defining is props here, and you say things like define props, which is a macro from Vue, we can also specify things like this using TypeScript syntax, or being more TypeScript friendly. Progress will be a number, okay, and on the progress we can now pass is progress, define this as 0, by the way, okay, and here we would like to define is the style here by using is now the template syntax, where here we're going to pass is the value here of progress, which means is the props.progress. And the same for this. I just want to print is the props.progress and the percentage. So if I go back to the code here, it actually filled that entirely here, most likely because we're not passing is that properly. Exactly, it's undefined. Okay, even though that I'm passing that as 0. If I want to define some defaults, TypeScript, in this case Vue props with default, okay, using the composition APIs, props validation of props passing. No, but this is props declaration here. More like to pass is typing props here, but if I want to pass is, for example, with value prop default values. Again, this is another macro with defaults. Okay, with defaults as a function here, where it receives the first parameter like this, the define props. Okay, and then the second argument is what you pass is the default values. Okay, so going back to the code. Going back to the code here. That's right. So first we define is with default. Okay, so this is a macro from view 3. The first argument is the define props, and the second is where you're going to define the default values. So progress is equal to 0. So now with this, if I go back to the code, in this case to the browser, exactly, we can probably see that it loads with the default behavior, which is 0. Alright, this is good. This is good. This is very, very good. So now, okay, it is time to make the XML, the XHR request and listen to that event and update in real time the loading component. So what we're gonna do here is this. So on submit this bottom, but first on the code here, on the go here, because we're using this view and we don't want to we want us to prevent the behavior by default. So we can do is submit prevent. So I don't want this form do it is behavior by default. Okay, and in fact call that. So let me take a look here at form prevent view default. Okay, so in here since this is an event, okay, oh come on, okay, since this is an event, is in there that I'm going to call that. Okay, it's in there that I want to call that function. In this case, let me call the load or the submit function. Okay, a function that I'm going to define here, which is function submit, that I'm going to do is performing the XML request. Okay, the XML request. So in here, okay, so since we're using this XML HTTP request, okay, which is great, Axios, which is a promise-based HTTP client for Node.js in the browser, it is isomorphic, equally can run in the browser and Node.js with the same code base, or on the server side, it uses the native Node.js HTTP model, while on the client browser, it uses HTML HTTP requests. Very, very important. So this is the great thing of Axios. It makes XML HTTP requests from the browser, or each make HTTP requests from nodes. It supports the promise APIs, intercept requests and response, transform requests, in here, transform requests and response data, cancel requests, timeouts, querying parameters, serialization with support for nested entry, automatic request body serializations to JSON, multiple URL encode, posting HTML form as JSON, automatic JSON data handling in response, progress capturing for browsers, and Node.js with extra info, speed rate, remaining time, setting bandwidth, limit for nodes, compatible with spec compliant form data and blocks, including Node.js, and client-side support for protecting against XSR or this cross-site request forgery. So this is one of the great things of using Axios, that we don't need to handle these XML HTTP requests for ourselves. However, we know how to do that. So, because here the data that we're gonna fetch is as a PDF, all right? As a PDF, and this is the data that we need to pass, okay? And this is the data that we need to pass to the to load the PDF here. Let me see how can we use Axios. Okay, let me know how can we use Axios to perform and to get the same outcomes that we have, right? So in other words, go back to the code here. Oh, come on, man. Go back to the code here. All right. Let me import is Axios. Using performing npm install Axios. Okay. A promise-based HTTP client for Node.js and the browser, and it is isomorphic because it can run in the browser and Node.js with the same code base, which is great. Okay. And on the server side, it used the native Node.js HTTP model, while on the client browser, it used XML HTTP requests. So XML HTTP requests are great because it allows to interact with the user by only retrieving data from a URL without having to do a full page refresh. Okay, so now that I have Axios here, okay, and we need to get the data and set the proper response types here. Now, what I want to do is to first run the dev server. Okay. Now that I get this PDF URL, it is time to make that request, okay, using Axios. And since we're using is Nuxt, okay, so Axios, let me see if we can, if we have an Axios Nuxt model, but for Vue 3, Nuxt 3. Axios model support Nuxt 2. Nuxt user 3 can use the new isomorphic fetch API migration. Okay, this is a composable function from this. So you can use the use fetch function from that URL as well as the options, where here you define the key, method, query parameters, body, headers, base URL, server, lazy, immediate, default, transform, pick, and watch. And in the promise, you get is data, pending, refresh, execute, an error. URL, the URL to fetch option, extend on JS of fetch options and async data options. Methods, query parameter, body, headers, base URL. All fetch option can be given a computer or ref value, and this will be watched and new request made automatically with any new value if that updated. Option from use async data, key, server, default, pick, watch an array of reactive source and auto refresh the fetch result when they change, transform, and immediate. Return value, data, pending, refresh, and execute. A function that can be used to refresh the data returned by the handler function. If you provide a function as res as URL parameter, or if you provide a function as arguments to the option parameter, then the useFetch call will not match the other useFetch calls. If you have not fetched data on the server, for example with server false, then the data will not be fetched until hide rotation completes. This means even if you await useFetch on the client side, data will remain null with script set up. This is the examples using interceptors. UseFetch is reserved function name transformed by the compiler, so you should not name your own function UseFetch. Okay. And data fetching, which is using one of this. Use fetch, use async data, and $fetch while using specific composables. Next call duplication or network call duplication, effective caching, suspense, and use fetch. The ofetch library is built on top of the fetch API and adds handy feature on to it. Works the same way in browser, node, and worker environments. Automatic response parsing, error handling, auto retries, interceptors. Read the full documentation on ofetch. Ofetch is auto-imported by Nuxt and used by the useFetch composable. It can also be used in the whole application with $fetch alias. Use async data, receive URL and get the data, whereas use async data might have more complex logic. Use fetch URL is nearly equivalent to use async URL and fetch the URL. It is developer experience sugar for most common use cases. There's some case when using the useFetch composable is not appropriate. For example, when a CMS or a third party provide their own query layer. In this case, you can use async data to wrap your code and still keep the benefit provided by the composable. So the first argument of async data is unique key. Okay, it's a unique key to use to catch the response of the second argument, the querying function. This argument can be ignored by directly passing the query function. In that case, it will auto-generate it. Client only fetching. Minimize payload size. And you can use transform catching and refreshing to get the catch data by key. Use Nuxt data. And if you want to watch for this, passing header and cookie, pass client header to the API. Be very careful before proxying headers to external API and just include header that you need. Not all headers are safe to be passed and might introduce unwanted behavior. Again, right now I'm looking at this. Pass cookie from server-side API calls on server-side response. Options API support. And serialization. When fetching data from the server directory, the response is serialized using JSON.stringify. However, since serialization is limited to only JavaScript primitive types, Nuxt does it best to convert the return type of $fetch and useFetch to make the actual value. So export default define event handler and you call that as foo. API.foo. Type of data is inferred as string even foo will return a date object. Custom serializer function. Using an alternative serializer, create add new date. Alright. So you can use useFetch, which is a wrapper of the fetch API. But this is the simple example. No. Use the Nuxt dev tool to inspect this data in the payload. Okay. Exactly how you can use this Nuxt dev tool.
I have to start this video off with a confession. I don't use dev tools, and that doesn't mean they're not great, especially when dealing with, say, management. The tool is amazing, but I'm just so used to console.logging some random BS that I never end up clicking to it. And that's why I'm so excited about the new Nuxt dev tools, because it's the first time I found myself actually using the dev tools that a library gives to me. LFO is a tool not only to inspect your app, but also helps bridge the gap between what you see in the browser and the actual code, making it really fast to edit. So in this video, we'll run through all the different parts of the dev tools so you can see how it can improve your developer experience. First, to add dev tools to your app, you can either do it automatically automatically by using npx nuxt latest devtools enable, or you can install it manually by installing Nuxt DevTools and then adding it as a module to your app. So now if you start your app and look at it in the browser, you'll see this floating Nuxt icon on your page. And I think this is why I go to these DevTools a lot more, because this icon is always here in dev mode. But if we click it, Nuxt DevTools opens up. We can see the current Nuxt version and if there's any updates, and then how many pages, components, imports, modules, and plugins we have inside of our app. So now that we've installed it, let's start running through all the different sidebar items to see what's possible in DevTools. First, in Pages, we can see all of the registered routes for our app. We can click any of the paths to go directly to that page. And if it's a dynamic route, we can even pass in things like a slug directly from this panel. This list will show all of the routes registered in View Router, as well as the layout that they're using. So this is super useful to quickly navigate around different parts of your app. Next is Components, where you can see all the components in your app and where they're coming from, whether it's things you define, runtime components, Nuxt built-in, or from third-party libraries. You can also see the relation between these components with this really nice looking graph view. And one of the coolest things is you can actually click this button to inspect your app. And now when you hover over different elements, you can see not only the component that it lines up to, but the exact line in that component. So for example, if we click this button here, our VS Code will open directly to where we can start making edits. Kind of similarly to the components list is the list of imports available in our app. Nuxt does a lot of auto importing, so this is nice to see what imports you're actually using. It's also a great way to see a full list of APIs for some of these third-party libraries, so you can get a good look of all the different options that are available. The Modules tab, as you might expect, is a list of all the modules that you're using in your app.
There's a lot of modules that you're using here in
which comes in really
your
handy.
Nuxt
One cool
application.
thing that the Nuxt team mentioned they might add is the ability to single-click install different modules directly from your DevTools. The next tab, Plugins, is another pretty straightforward one and shows all the plugins for your app. But the next tab, Runtime Config, is one that's really useful. It lets you not only see the runtime config that you defined, but also anything injected by third-party library. You can edit them directly from your DevTools and see what your app looks like with these different configurations. I think especially when you're using modules, this is really useful because it can give you a better understanding of what these modules are doing under the hood. The Payload tab is probably one of the ones that I go to the most often because it shows you the different values that your app is holding in state, whether it's defined with use state, use something like Nuxt color mode, or if it's keyed from use async data and also use fetch. This means when we make an API call, we can see that data immediately in our DevTools. Hooks is really powerful if you want to analyze some of the performance in your app because you can see exactly what hooks are taking the most time and use this as a great place.
Interesting here. For the hooks, server hooks and client hooks.
Start your optimizations. Virtual files shows everything generated by Nuxt to support different conventions, and this can be useful if you want to debug what Nuxt is doing under the hood. Next is the Inspect tab. For me, this is one of the coolest things. I don't know if that's just because I nerd out over a lot of this stuff, but it shows you all the different steps of transformation that Nuxt and Vue do to your code. Nuxt and Vue do a ton of cool stuff under the hood. Auto imports, compiling single file components, enabling hot module replacement, and with the Inspect tab, you can track each of these transformations step by step, from the code that you write to the
transformation
step inside of your app. I think this is really cool to get a look at some.
Okay, this is also very cool. What's going on here is the transform stack.
Components, enabling hot module replacement, and
then he made model replacement here from Vue to Vue.
With the Inspect tab, you can track each of these transformations step by step, from the
and then he transformed with the Nuxt import
code that you write to the final output that's running inside of your app.
And to the final output that is running inside of your app.
I think this is really cool to get a look at some of Vue's internals and can help you become a true power user of the framework. I know I said this a lot, but the next few features of Nuxt DevTools are really the ones that I'm most excited about. And that's being able to use VS Code from Nuxt DevTools, and also the fact that modules can inject custom tabs into your DevTools. So the VS Code tab plays with an experimental VS Code feature, and it essentially injects VS Code into your DevTools. There's no docs, so I'm not sure the right way to set it up, but the kind of bootleg way that I found was I went to this VS Code article, which is linked in the description, grabbed the bash script from this file, and ran it in my terminal. Then I ran code server from my terminal, which prompted some GitHub authorization that I had to do since this was the first time I was running it. And that was it. Since code server is now installed, Nuxt DevTools can detect this, and when we go to our VS Code tab, we can hit start server.
Okay, so you can detect in the launch tab a VS Code for
Again, just to reiterate, this is experimental. And
this is an experimental,
this will work for me. But I hope as this feature gets fleshed out, we get some more docs and some more legit instruction. And then the final feature is the fact that modules can easily inject whatever they want. For example, Vue use injects docs, Nuxt OG image injects this nice preview, and it's also really easy to add our own tabs. Depending on the version of DevTools you have, you can either use this code snippet to create your own module and add a custom tab like this, or if you're on the edge release or watching this in the future, you can quickly Quickly add a custom tabs field inside of your Nuxt config dev tools property, where you specify a name, title, icon, and iframe source for your custom tab. And I can see this being incredibly useful. For example, you could have your CMS down here, so you don't have to switch between different tabs to preview content changes. So all in all, I'm really hyped for Nuxt DevTools. It's still really early, but I highly recommend checking it out and start seeing how it can improve your workflow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Yeah, the whole point of this is to see how it improves your workflow. Okay, that's actually very, very interesting. Quick introduction of that. So interesting, very, very interesting. But what I'm doing here is to see how, which is here. So once you click here, you're supposed to access to the Nuxt DevTool, right? I go back home. Okay. Nuxt DevTool is still early preview. So here you can look at the pages. So enable routing here. This operation requires permission for running command access file from the browser. A request is sent to the server, waiting for authorization. Please check your terminal for the instruction and come back. Please open the following URL in your browser. Okay. 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 This is an experimental feature from Nuxt. Okay. Yeah, because there's only one page, and this is the number of components. That's right, loading dynamic URL PDF, loading pagination PDF render, as well as the total of imports. Built-in composable, right now I'm using is only this. Alright, unmounted ref. Cool. Composable from libraries. Is view 2 and is view 3. Keep looking at the models. So right now I'm only using is a model, Tailwinds CSS, as well as the assets and the runtime config. So for example, like public runtime config, but there is nothing of that. Private running runtime config. Okay. As well as the payload from here, from the state, and from your data. So I'm not fetching data right now for the moment. As well as the open graph, build, analyze, storage, VS Code, which is an experimental feature, hooks, virtual file, and inspect. So here you can see how it is bundled. So what is the step that it took to transform your view application here into something that the browser will ultimately render. So is this. Holy crap. Okay. very, very interesting, by the way. Very, very, very interesting features, I must say. Yeah, completely. Very, very interesting features. So if I now close this, that's right. Okay, that's good. That's good. In any case, after all, I just want us to. After all, I just want us to now perform this HTTP request, okay, using Axios. So it is funny because, yeah, because we're not using Axios, and in fact, it says that you can perform here from the data fetching docs. You can use each one of them, and the fetch or the use fetch here, after all, is a wrapper of the fetch API. Okay. After all, is a wrapper of the fetch API. A better fetch API works on no browser and workers. Okay. A better fetch API, that's right, works with Node.js, keep alive, but parsing response and response type, get the block version of the response. Okay, awesome, which is what we want here. All right, parsing response, handling errors, auto retry, type friendly, adding base URL, adding query search parameter, interceptors. It's possible to provide async interceptors to hook into lifecycle events of OFetch call. You may want to use OFetch to create shared interceptors on request, on request error, and on response errors. Create fetch with default options, adding headers, adding HTTPS agents, access to raw response. Okay, native fetch. We use conditionally export to detect Node.js and automatically use no fetch native. Experimental flag. So OFetch will smartly parse JSON in native value using the string. A better redistribution of node fetch. Prefer to native globals when available here. A redistribution of node fetch for better backward and forward compatibility. No fetch native, fetch from form data headers, abort, alias to no fetch, and PMF. A redistribution of node fetch v3. A lightweight model that brings the fetch API to Node.js. But underneath the hood, they're using is no fetch. Okay. This is exactly, instead of implementing an XML HTTP request in Node.js to run browser-specific fetch polyfill, why not go from native HTML to fetch API directly? Hence, no fetch minimal code for a window.fetch compatible API on Node.js runtime. See Jason Miller isomorphic on fetch, or Leonardo Quisada cross-fetch for isomorphic use. Export no fetch from server-side, what WG fetch for client-side. So stay consistent with window.fetch API, making conscious trade-off when following what you see, what you get, fetch spec and string spec. Implementation details document no difference. Use native promise and async functions. Use native node string for body on both request and response. Decode content encoding gzip deflate broadly, properly, and convert string output such as response.text, response.json, and things like that. Interesting. So fetch, okay, so instead of implementing an XML HTTP request in Node.js, why not go from native HTTP to fetch API directly, right? So this is what they do here. So they take the native HTTP model and make and make compatible with the window.fetch API. Okay. Providing global access from no fetch. Okay. Providing global access, common uses. Simple post with JSON, post with 4 parameters, exactly, new URL search parameter, handling exceptions, note 300 and 500 response are not exceptions and should be handled in then. Handling client server error, handling cookies, and advanced uses. String. The Node.js way is to use a string when possible, exactly. You can pipe the REST body for that, but this is not for more advanced case. Accessing headers and other metadata, extract set cookies, post data using a file, and no fetch comes with specs compliant form. No, okay. Request cancellation with abort signal in test case. So for test case for more examples. Options. Okay, custom high watermarks, insecure HTTP parser. Okay, class response, class request. Class request. New request and class response. Class header, interface body, and fetch error, abort error, and TypeScript. Okay. All methods specified in the fetch standard are implemented. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay. And see more options for this. So what I'll need to read is the headers from that. You know what I mean? It's like no. Okay, so no fetch. No fetch loading indicator, because that's all we want is to find a way to get there. Fetch API downloads progress. This was 5 years ago. Careful with these answers. No fetch loading client side, because after all we're using is the fetch API from that. Because the using is that, because the using is the fetch API for that. It is called fetch progress, but you have to be careful with this. A workaround is for using the XML, the HTTP request. Okay, the XML upload updated with a progress event. But this fetch progress of fetch response for fetch API. Get progress report of your report call, fetch like percentage, speed, total transfer, and it remaining. Yeah, because HSR upload, after all, give you the promise. You know? As I already explained in other answer, it is not possible with fetch, but with HSR, here's my a little more compact HSR solution. Axios allow you to do that. So this is one of the great things of Axios. XML requests. If you're using this for React Native, beware that XML request seems to be very, very slow. So you have this wrapper of fetch. With XML, you can do that. This was in 2016. This is impossible yet, but in the future, this will be handled either by stream or some kind of high-level callback pass into fetch. Well, at the time of this, oh my god, okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So yeah, actually support that pretty well. But because on GS, so our fetch library is built on top of the fetch API, which what it does is to instead of implementing the XHR on the node, they make the HTTP client much more friendly to the window.fetch object. Okay, so the question is, the window fetch, okay, or the fetch API provide you this? It is a more powerful and flexible replacement of HTML. Fetch header request and response. uploading a file, uploading multiple files, process that text file line by line, checking that a fetch was successful, supply your own request object, guards, and immutable. Method fetch. And the header, body, mode, credentials, omit, same, origin. Include, catch, redirect, refer, integrity, keep alive, signal, priority. URL credentials, navigate to a WebSocket. Fetch request example. Alright. Fed with init then request. And this is not widely supported for a lot of or for certain features. Interesting. With the fetch global function. Yeah, because after all, I just want this to loading progress with fetch API. Exactly, but you need to read that content length. Exactly. If you get that, compress encode response. For example, gzip compress, say the application sent accepting gzip header. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Please note that there is currently no way to fetch to track upload progress. For that purpose, please use XML HTTP requests. We'll cover it later. This was updated 2 years ago. To track download progress, we can use a response.body property. It is a readable string and a special object that provides body chunk by chunk as it comes. Readable strings are described as the string API spec. Unlike response.text and response.json and other methods, response body gives full control over the reading process. Okay, we can count how much is consumed at any moment. Here's a sketch code that reads the response from the body. Okay, if you're using response.body.getter, get reader, done is true for the last chunk. Value is you need a array to chunk byte. The result of await reader.read call is an object with two properties. Done, true when reading is complete, otherwise false, and the value, the type of array. A type array of byte. String API also describes a synchronous interaction with readable string for that. So for example, if you're using this, get the total length. Exactly, get the total length must be defined on the server. So the server must define that, and then you're gonna read chunk by chunk. Okay, so receive length and the content length, and then concatenate chunk into a single array, and they go into a string, and we're done. Okay, only for download progress. Also, if the site is so no, we should check receive length in the loop and break it once. It reaches a certain limit so the chunks won't overflow the memory. Okay, exactly. This is to define this. So now that we're using is the fetch API. Okay, we can just define this and show the loading screen. Okay. So with that, that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.